I bet not even Madame Leota knows all of these secrets at the Haunted Mansion. Welcome, foolish mortals, to the next episode in our Secret series, the series where we dig deep into the Easter eggs, backstories, and Imagineering magic that make our favorite theme parks come to life. I am your host as we dig deep into one of the most beloved, iconic, and popular rides of all time, the Haunted Mansion. And consider this dismaying observation. I have compiled over 75 fun facts, details, and secrets about the home of the 999 Happy Haunts, so look alive and we will begin our little tour. There's no turning back now. Actually, scratch that. Before we can go ride the Haunted Mansion, we gotta talk about the history. We gotta bring it back all the way to the beginning, which happened way before anyone ever stepped foot inside this iconic ride. You see, Walt Disney knew he wanted a haunted attraction for years. They were incredibly popular at carnivals and fairs and places he would go growing up. The problem was, how do you make an attraction that's spooky, scary, and all about death at the happiest place on earth? And the Haunted Mansion went through many iterations before it became what we know and love today. There were ideas for a walk-through wax museum with different spooky, scary scenes to look at. There were ideas for a museum of the weird. Keep that one in mind. We'll talk about the designer of that more later, where it was just kind of like not necessarily scary, but just kind of off-putting, odd, eccentric things that you looked at. There were thoughts of, an actual haunted house, but nobody could get it quite right. Regardless, Walt Disney tasked two of his animators and his earliest Imagineers to start drawing what the exterior of the Haunted Mansion would look like. It was then that Harper Goff and Ken Anderson, 10 years before the Haunted Mansion would ever open its doors in Disneyland, sat down and drew what they imagined when they thought of a haunted house sitting up on a hill. It was dilapidated, it was scary, it was spooky. Now, we're going to be talking about a lot of Imagineers here, and I should introduce these two. Harper Goff is someone that Walt met in London when they were both bidding a lot of money on a model train set, and he wanted to know who was as crazy as him about trains that they would spend this money on the model train. He met Harper Goff, ended up offering him a job, and Harper Goff became someone that worked on the movie sets for things like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which translated really well to working at Disneyland on set design around the park. Ken Anderson, like a lot of Disney's original Imagineers, was an animator first. He figured these people were creative, and if they could draw, they could build a theme park. Why not? And Ken Anderson was known for being a king of mean. In his career, he's drawn iconic villains such as Cruella de Vil and Shere Khan, the witch in Snow White he helped work on, so it's no surprise that that is who Walt would tap to work on a haunted house. However, what Ken and Harper drew when they thought of a haunted house up on a hill was, well, actually maybe what you would think if you were told to draw a haunted house. I'm talking boarded up windows, I'm talking shutters falling off, I'm talking dilapidated, foreclosed, and they presented these ideas to Walt Disney again 10 years before the Haunted Mansion would actually open. We see the first concept art for this project, and Walt says, no, not for me. You see, Walt Disney was very insistent about the entire project of Disneyland making sure that it was a nice theme park. Generally, back then, amusement parks were gross, carnivals were gross, they were dirty, they were smelly, they had seedy people working there, and Walt always said that's not what his park was going to be like, and he wanted to keep that theme going with the Haunted Mansion. He even said, the ghosts can take care of the inside, but we will take care of the outside. Eventually, the Imagineers, with Walt's approval, decided on the design that we know and love today out in Disneyland, which is a southern plantation manor, because in Disneyland, Haunted Mansion sits in New Orleans Square. Beautiful wraparound porch, big columns. The mansion itself was built in 1963. The problem was we still didn't know what the inside was going to be like. In fact, they hung a sign outside the Haunted Mansion that said, "Haunted attraction coming soon, ghosts around the world may acquire in ghost relations about taking up residence." But the Imagineers were still fighting about what the attraction was going to be like inside. It is at this point that you've got three main contenders coming to the ring to fight for what they think the Haunted Mansion should be. You've got Rolly Crump, who was the main designer behind the Museum of the Weird I mentioned earlier. Rolly Crump was a very eccentric guy known for doing things in Imagineering like the Tower of the Winds outside of It's a Small World at the 65 World's Fair. He wanted this very weird, ethereal, odd creatures and creepies to be there, but not necessarily traditional, scary, spooky. The person who wanted it to be traditionally scary, spooky was Claude Coates. He was a background animator that was known for being a little bit more dark and brooding, and he wanted this to be a true haunted experience. And then there was one of my personal favorite Imagineers, Mark Davis, who prior to joining Imagineering was a character animator, and he was known as the Ladies' Man because he animated some of Disney's most famous and iconic female characters. I'm talking Maleficent, I'm talking Tinkerbell, I'm talking Cinderella. But Mark Davis was also known for being a jokester. He was a funny guy, and he thought that this should be a whimsical, silly, goofy kind of ghost experience, not a truly scary one. Mark Davis is known for basically anything funny that you see in classic attractions. Any kind of visual gags, that's Mark Davis. Think of the folks running up the pole in Jungle Cruise because they're being chased by the rhino. Think of the guy sleeping with the pigs in Pirates of the Caribbean. That is Mark Davis, and that is the energy he was bringing to the Haunted Mansion. So you kind of have this clash of the titans of these three Imagineers, each campaigning for their style of attraction. But one thing was eventually decided, and that was the style of attraction it was going to be. Remember, originally we were talking about a walkthrough experience? Well, that idea got thrown away thanks to the 64-65 New York's World's Fair, where the Imagineering team built the original Omni-Mover. It was called the Ford Magic Skyway, and it was an attraction sponsored by Ford, shockingly, where you got into hollowed-out Ford convertibles that were being pushed along by wheels underneath them as you went through a variety of scenes, including the dinosaur scene that you can now see on the Disneyland Railroad. But because of this, the perpetually moving chain of cars, that was again the first iteration of the Omni-Mover. And the Imagineers and Walt loved the Omni-Mover because, one, it's a very efficient ride type. Theoretically, because you can load and unload guests as it's continuously moving, theoretically, it would never stop moving. It does, of course. If you've ridden an Omni-Mover attraction, you know that it stops, and that's to maybe load a wheelchair guest or somebody that needs a little bit more time to get on and off. They can slow it down for that same reason, but theoretically, in a like perfect, if there were only ghosts riding this attraction, it would never stop moving. The other pro of the Omni-Mover is when you are in the vehicle, the Doom Buggy, which you had legendary Imagineer Bob Gurr design, you have full control of your audience and you can make them look at whatever you want them to look at. Unlike a walkthrough experience where you can turn your head on a swivel and look at everything you want to, therefore everything has to be decorated, in a Doom Buggy, that's on the swivel. So the Imagineers can turn you to look at what you want to see. So when you're going through an iconic scene like the Ballroom where you are completely facing that scene, there's nothing behind you, because why would they decorate it? Why would they spend that money and time if they are controlling the story that you're focused on? But the theme of the mansion was still being debated amongst the Imagineers, and unfortunately it did not help that Walt Disney passed away in 1966. Without their head visionary, they were incredibly lost as a team. They knew they had to keep going, they knew that's what Walt would have wanted, but that loss of the head dreamer really put an even bigger stop on this attraction. So the mansion, again, already built out to Disneyland, continues to sit empty. However, teamwork makes the dream work, and eventually the Imagineers decided to compromise and combine these three ideas, which is why when you do the Haunted Mansion, you get a little bit of all of those. The first part of the mansion, when you've got the ghost host, the library, the portraits, the mysterious stairs, that's all Claude Coates, spooky, scary. But when you get to the graveyard scene and you've got the whimsical ghost singing a melodious tune and having a good time at their ghost tea party, that's Mark Davis Haunted Mansion. And the idea of putting Mark second was in case there are some smaller guests joining the Haunted Mansion, they might get scared because of Claude, but hopefully they're going to have a good time in the Mark Davis half, and then by the time they leave, they forgot about the trauma of the stretch room. We also can't forget Rolly Crump, our Museum of the Weird King. He has a few notes in the Haunted Mansion as well. If you know what to look for, you'll know it's Rolly Crump. Anything that's, again, a little weird, like the Godfather clock with fingers instead of hands, that's Rolly Crump. Now, at this point, they're finally going to fill the Haunted Mansion out at Disneyland, and the Florida Project, aka Walt Disney World, and the Magic Kingdom were in the works. So when they were building everything for the Haunted Mansion out at Disneyland, they went ahead and made two. I'm talking 2 sets of every animatronic, I'm talking 2 sets of every portrait. Every single thing they were making, they went ahead and made 2 because they knew they were going to open the Haunted Mansion as an opening day ride on October 1st, 1971 here at the Magic Kingdom, which actually means that the Haunted Mansion here in Walt Disney World was the first completed attraction because they built it all in 1969 when they were building the Haunted Mansion in California. But there are some key differences between the Haunted Mansion in California and in Florida, and the first one is the exterior. Again, in California, Haunted Mansion sits in New Orleans Square, so it matches that theme. But there's no New Orleans Square here in Magic Kingdom. You probably know this, but it's Liberty Square, which is themed to colonial America, particularly in the New England area. So putting a Southern plantation style home wouldn't make any sense. They then decided they needed to go with something that would be both period and location correct, which is a Gothic upstate manor in the New York Hudson River area. Specifically, they drew a lot of inspiration from the Harry Packer Mansion, which is in Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania. Again, that upstate Gothic style of architecture. Which leads me to a very interesting fun fact about the Haunted Mansion, which is that it's the only attraction worldwide that sits in a different land in every park around the world. There are lots of rides that exist in multiple Disney parks around the world, but Haunted Mansion moves locations and therefore exteriors as it goes around the world. We already said it's in New Orleans Square in Disneyland. It's in Liberty Square here in Magic Kingdom. When they decided to build it in Tokyo Disneyland, they more or less copied the one here, but they put it in Fantasyland. I've heard a couple different explanations of this. One, it just fit. That's where they had room in the park to put Haunted Mansion. And two, I've heard that because of the way that their culture celebrates death, they look at the spirits as more of a friendly thing. So that's why it goes into Fantasyland. I've seen a lot of Japanese horror movies, and those spirits do not seem that friendly to me, but that is not where I'm an expert. In Disneyland Paris, it takes on a completely different theme, and it's Phantom Manor, in my opinion, the scariest of the mansions and my favorite one I've ever been on. And in Hong Kong Disneyland, they built an entire land around their theme of the mansion, which is called Mystic Manor. Haven't been on that one yet, wink, but eventually I will be able to weigh in on that one as well. And for those wondering, there is no Haunted Mansion in Shanghai Disneyland. But you know what's interesting, and I'm just thinking about this now, is that when they brought the Haunted Mansion to sea in Disney Cruise Line on the Disney Treasure last year, coming to the Disney Destiny this year, they brought the Haunted Mansion parlor, and it's themed to being a nautical sea captain. So once again, the theme makes sense for where you are. All right, that's enough history for now. Not really. The history is going to continue throughout this entire thing, but I think it's time we go ahead and start going through the queue and looking at the mansion itself. Okay, what is your bat's name?
My bat's name is Neil Batrick Scaris.
This is Bat Benatar. Careful, she's a heartbreaker. She'll hit you with her best shot. She thinks she's invincible.
Mine is Victor for Victor Frankenstein.
I love it. Thank you so much. I just got on the queue to ride, and one of the things on my list to tell you guys was that all of the mansion maids name their bats. And one of the cast members, that's the cast members, they're mansion maids and butlers. But one of the cast members asked me my bat's name. Her name is Harriet for an Imaginary you will learn about shortly. And then they told me their bat's names, and their bat's names are way better than mine. But that's a fun thing you can do is if you see a mansion maid, ask her what her bat's name is. As we first enter the standby queue, we are here in the carriage house, which is where we would be parking our carriages. And there is a carriage parked outside the Haunted Mansion, but you get hints of that before you even get in, because if you look down on the ground, you can see wagon wheel tracks and horseshoe imprints. The carriage, by the way, led by the ghost horse, which if you listen closely, you can hear him at times. This hearse was a recycled prop used in the film The Sons of Katie Elder, which came out in 1965. And as you continue into the queue, you've got this black awning, which a lot of people probably think was just added by Imagineering to get guests out of the Florida sun. But that was actually pretty typical of a mansion of this time because of the unpredictable weather, as well as the unflexible nature of a lot of ladies' garments, because they were very tight, they were very long, they were very heavy, they had high heels on. If there was bad weather, they wouldn't be able to easily get into the manor. So these types of fancy homes often had a covered entrance in case of bad weather for the ladies, so they could pull the carriage right up to the cover, they could hop out and gracefully enter the home, as well as an uncovered entrance, which you see looking up onto the mansion in case of nice weather or for the gentlemen. And speaking of looking at the mansion itself, it's designed to remind you of a creature crouching with wings like it could be about to pounce, which is why you've got these long kind of extended wings on either side of the mansion. And also look around, because a lot of the architecture of the mansion, as well as the grates and the fences and the decor, is meant to look like someone's always watching you. So you'll see bat faces in the fireplace grates, even these little figures on top of the mansion, which look like little ghostly or spooky creatures. Feels like something spooky is happening before you even lay eyes or hear your first ghost. But something a lot more silly about the mansion is if you look on top, you see these ornate details. And if you're a chess aficionado, you may recognize as those different pieces. You may also recognize that one is missing. You've got the king and queen, the rook, the bishop, the pawn, but there is no knight. Now, this is because Mark Davis, again, one of the lead Imagineers on the attraction, was a huge chess buff. So he liked to leave little chess Easter eggs in the stories. There's a couple different versions of this tale. One is that there was a model of the Haunted Mansion in Imagineering, and some of the other Imagineers pranked Mark by stealing his chess pieces and putting them on top of the Haunted Mansion. And he ended up liking it and what they looked like, so they left them on as part of the design. However, Mark removed the knight because it's always night in the Haunted Mansion. One of my favorite Imagineering teams to talk about that goes vastly unrecognized IMO is the horticulture and landscaping team, because they truly use the flowers, plants, trees to tell the story. And most of that was run by an original Imagineer named Bill Evans. He was in charge of creating a jungle out of the orange groves in California for the original Jungle Cruise. And one thing they did intentionally here at the mansion was choose not only big, spooky, looming-looking, creepy trees, but they also did things like choose these roses that would be blood red on purpose. There's not a ton of other color, though, in the landscaping here, which is very different than when you're in the rest of Liberty Square, where all of the landscaping flowers are red, white, and blue, and there's lots of them. Because this is the Haunted Mansion, it would be weird if you walked up and there was just like big sunflowers and hydrangeas and glorious flowers everywhere. And while Walt, again, wanted it to be curated and look like it was taken care of, it still needed to have that element of creepy. But like I said, the blood red roses, they just make sense. As a Disney history nerd, the Haunted Mansion queue is actually one of my favorites because they've always had fun Easter eggs and nods to the people that made this incredible attraction. But in 2011, they revealed an interactive queue with even more cool details to look at. I don't often do it because if I'm riding Haunted Mansion, I'm usually using a lightning lane because this is a great tier 2 on the charts, tier 1 in our hearts lightning lane. But we are definitely going through the full queue today and pointing out all those cool details. Like, for example, a lot of people don't realize that these busts of this family are actually a murder mystery. People enjoy the busts because they are whimsical to look at, but it actually is a little game. I'm going to tell you the answer, but if you don't want it, skip ahead to the timestamp on screen. Just know that if you want to try to figure out the murder mystery, start with Uncle Jacob. All right, here we go. Uncle Jacob. Greed was the poison he had swallowed. He went first, the others followed. His killer's face he surely knew. Now try to discover who killed who. As you can see, Uncle Jacob's got the cash, which is a huge motive in a murder mystery. So somebody killed Uncle Jacob for the cash. He was poisoned. Who has the poison? Birdie. Look at his plaque. Birdie, avid hunter and expert shot. In the end, it's what he got. So he was shot by Aunt Florence. Never did a dishonorable deed, yet found face down in Canary Seed. I don't believe she's never done a dishonorable deed. That face is guilty. But Canary Seed, we're moving to the twins. Wellington and Forsythia departed life while in their beds with identical bumps on identical heads. Which leaves us with Cousin Maud, our sleeping beauty who never awoke the night her dreams went up in smoke. Now, how did that happen? Because she got everybody else, but she still went up in smoke. But the Imagineers left the most subtle clue of all time, and you only know if you know to look for it. Now, back in the day, they didn't have as many hair care products, good smelling products as they have now. They also didn't have as many showers as they have now. So ladies, as a trick, would often light a match, blow it out, and then stick it in their hair as a way to have that like sooty, burny smell mask some of the other smells when it wasn't a hair wash day, which as a lover of dry shampoo, I get it. Not every day's a hair wash day, ladies. But Cousin Maud was distracted, and she stuck the match in her hair without lighting it and blowing it out first. And she took a nap and was tossing and turning, perhaps with some guilt over murdering 2 children, who's to say. But it seems in that tossing and turning, she actually lit that match, which lit her bed and the rest of the house on fire. If you don't believe me, check the back of her head. Next up, we come to a couple of tombstones, which are nods to the Imagineers that worked on this attraction. For example, we've got our patriarch, dear departed, Grandpa Mark. Well, that's Mark Davis, who I've mentioned multiple times at this point. And right next to him, we've got Francis Xavier. No time off for good behavior. That's for Francis Xavier Atencio, who went by X Atencio. He was the Imagineer. He was also an animator, but he had quite a way with words. So Walt tapped him to write a few songs. And he said, well, I've never written a song before. And he said, that's all right. I think you can do it. So X Atencio actually wrote the lyrics to not only Grim Grinning Ghosts here at Haunted Mansion, but Yo Ho, Yo Ho, A Pirate's Life for Me at Pirates of the Caribbean. He also wrote the narration for the Ghost Host. So when I say he had a way with words, he's the genius who came up with your cadaverous pallor portrays an aura of foreboding. Speaking of the song, the music was written by Buddy Baker, who's got over 200 Disney credits to his name, which include the Wonderful World of Color intro and the Mickey Mouse Club March. Also, as a note, there is a lot of construction right here, meaning we're not going to be able to see all of the Imagineer tombstones. So I'm going to see as many as we can, and then I'll run through the rest of them that are hidden by this construction, because I think they deserve to be mentioned as well. Here we've got a crypt with these different instruments. These are each played by a member of the Phantom Five, which is the ghost band in the graveyard scene. And right next to that, we've got the Ravenscroft organ, which is there for two reasons. One, remember the name Ravenscroft, because we're going to talk about him again when we get onto the attraction. But also look up, and you're actually going to see this red-eyed raven looking down at you. This was one of the ideas by Rolly Crump of having this creepy raven be kind of a narrator, guide character throughout the attraction. They even went as far as adding him into some scenes. You probably know he's there in the ride, but they ended up nixing him as a bigger character. But this is a nod to that original idea. Another narrator character that Rolly thought up was a one-eyed cat, which you can see as a statue in the Disneyland load area, and here you can see him added on the crypt. In fact, if you look at all these drawings above the one-eyed cat, you can see they're taken from Rolly Crump's original concept art. Another gravestone here in the center of the queue is for Master Gracie laid to rest, no mourning please at his request. And a lot of people that love the Haunted Mansion know the name Master Gracie. He's actually the owner of the house, and you can see what he looked like both in his prime and what he might look like now as you enter the mansion and see the aging portrait. That's of Master Gracie, who is named after Yale Gracie, another Imagineer who had no formal training but loved to tinker and was an amateur magician. So he is the special effects master for the Haunted Mansion. It was him working with Rolly Crump that figured out pretty much every single effect that you're going to see on the Haunted Mansion. A lot of them were very, very simple and almost genius in their simplicity. It was a lot of shadow effects, lighting techniques, but we owe a lot of the most iconic things about the Haunted Mansion, including the ballroom scene, the library bus, and Madame Leota, to Yale Gracie. Just past Master Gracie, you're going to see Culpepper Klein, the captain, who is drowned and is resting in brine here. And this was another of the ideas and stories they decided to have for the mansion. And it was that this was a captain. There was a couple versions of it, but the darkest version was that this captain entombed his wife into a wall in the mansion, but then he's lost at sea. You can see a portrait of him as a mariner inside the load area of the attraction. He's also heavily featured on the Disney Treasure in the Haunted Mansion parlor, which makes sense. And that's one of my favorite things about the mansion is there's all these characters and all these stories, but the Imagineers didn't really spell anything specifically out for you because they wanted, and what's become very successful, is people to make up their own lore and their own backstory about these characters at the mansion. But originally, this captain's wife was a woman named Prudence, and we actually get to hear from her as she's doing some different rhyme practice in the interactive queue. One of the rhymes she does read out talks about Sally Slater being eaten by an alligator, and that is the ballerina you see in the stretch room. Looks like Prudence is an entertaining guest today with her poetry, but if you look right here, the spectrocom to speak with her was patented by R.H. Goff, which is Harper Goff, who, again, is the Imagineer who drew the original concept art for the mansion itself. And no story is as legendary as our attic bride, Constance. For years, people wanted to know who she was, what happened to her husbands, did she inherit the mansion, who is this bride who's very obviously killing all of her different husbands. And so cast members would get on board and they would make up their own kind of lore and stories about it and embellish guests. And at one point, there was a metal gate that would lock in place into the ground when it was closed, and because of that, there was a gold ring in the ground, which was where the locking mechanism for the gate would be. That gate eventually moved, but the ring was not taken out of the ground, so a lot of guests and cast members alike created the lore that that was the bride's wedding ring that she threw out the window after killing her husband. That became such almost fact, it became Bible to people that loved the Haunted Mansion, that when the Imagineers built this enchanted interactive queue in 2011, well, you better believe they added the bride's wedding ring. One of my favorite details is right here in the queue. I'm always telling you to look down for details and secrets when you're in the parks. And if you look very closely right here as we continue our way through the graves, you're going to see footprints and paw prints. And if you're a fan of the ride, you know those belong to the gravedigger and his very hungry looking dog. Also, we have a couple of more crypts right here, and of course these names are all important. Farewell forever, Mr. Freeze, your voice will carry on the breeze. I'm not going to tell you who that is yet, but you can probably guess based on the rhyme, and I'll let you know once we get into the mansion. You've also got Drink a Toast to our friend Ken, fill your glass and don't say when. That's for Ken Anderson, again, an animator that worked on some of the original concept art for the mansion. Brother Roland right here, that's Rolly Crump. And then Uncle Blaine is for Blaine Gibson. He was Walt Disney's master sculptor. He was also also an animator, and he would often have little sculptures that he had made in his workshop, in his wood shop. And so Walt brought him over to Imagineering, and Blaine Gibson, in his career, ended up being the sculptor who did every single ghost on the Haunted Mansion, every single pirate on Pirates of the Caribbean, and every single president through Bush in the Hall of Presidents, and that's just to name a few. He was known for sculpting faces of people he'd actually seen in real life because it was easier than coming up with something out of his imagination. So his wife often had to hit him in church because he was staring at people, which means if you happen to be in the same place as Blaine Gibson for long enough, your face could have theoretically appeared in a Disney attraction. Here we have a grave for Colin Campbell, who was known for doing some of the artistic renderings and concept art at the mansion. Also, based on the tombstones we've now seen, and I know the ones coming up, I know who we missed. We weren't able to see the tombstones for Chuck Mile, who was one of the master planners of the entire park, as well as one of the architects on the building of the Haunted Mansion. For Gordon Williams, who was a sound effects Imagineer. For Dave Burkhart, who was the model builder for the mansion. Or for Harriet Burns, one of my favorite Imagineers, one of the first 3 Imagineers and the first female Imagineer. She was known for her details work, things like sewing the real human hair onto that one pirate's leg at Pirates of the Caribbean. She came over as a set designer and scenic painter from TV, including the Mickey Mouse Club, and Walt recruited her because, again, of her attention to detail. And as we round the corner here before you actually head into the mansion, you're going to see a bunch more of those tombstones. You've got one for Claude Coates, again, one of the head designers, the spooky, scary designer behind the mansion. You've got one that reads, "Here lies Fred, a great big rock fell on his head." That's for Fred Yorger, who they often called the rock star of Imagineering because he was known for his great rock work. Other notable works of his include the Jungle Cruise and the original fountain inside the lobby of the Polynesian. There's a tombstone that reads, "Here lies a man named Martin. The lights went out on this old Spartan." That's for Bud Martin. He was a special effects Imagineer, and his favorite football team were the Michigan State Spartans. You've got a tombstone for Hewitt. This was the lead interior designer. For Dorothea Redman, who drew a lot of the concept art for the interior. For Master Sewell, he was the head modeler at Imagineering. You've also got one for Wathel R. Bender. This is for Wathel Rogers, who's known as the godfather of audio animatronics. He's who figured out how to make the human animatronics, first seen at Carousel of Progress and Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln. Towards the back of the graveyard here, you're going to see graves for people named Gus, Ezra, Phineas, Bartholomew Gore, and others. These are all famous characters within the Haunted Mansion, and I bet you can guess who Gus, Ezra, and Phineas are, considering they're a trio. And of course, if we're going to honor the creators, you got to have Walt, which is why you've got W.E.D., Walter Elias Disney, up on the hillside as well. And lastly, the most iconic and memorable of the tombstones, right here, the one that maybe or maybe is not watching you, for Leota. And a lot of people know that that is for Madame Leota, who is the fortune teller who does the seance and brings the ghosts to materialize for us on the ride. But it's actually named after a real person named Leota Toombs. She was an Imagineer, and with a name like that, it's no shock she ended up in the Haunted Mansion. But she was a very striking woman. So when Rolly Crump and Yale Gracie and the other Imagineers were trying to master, if you will, LOL, get it, Master Gracie? You get it. An effect, they asked if Leota Toombs would serve as the model. And she ended up being the model for Madame Leota, and she looked so good doing it, they ended up keeping her in the attraction. And I'm going to talk more about it when we actually go through and see the ballroom scene. But I think it's fun that this tombstone is a reference to not only an iconic Haunted Mansion character, but a real Imagineer who worked on the ride. Now, first things first, as you're greeted into the mansion, you hear the ghost host for the first time.
Welcome, foolish mortals, to the Haunted Mansion. I am your host, your ghost host.
The ghost host is voiced by legendary voice actor Paul Frees, who did hundreds of roles over his career, including several iconic Disney roles. He also voiced Ludwig von Drake. He's also the auctioneer over at Pirates of the Caribbean. When Disney found a voice actor they liked, they used them quite a bit. And if you want to know what Paul Frees looks like IRL, you can actually see him. His likeness was actually used as the bowler hat guy in one of the stretch room portraits. And speaking of those portraits, you can actually get a sneak peek, a little foreshadowing of one of the most iconic characters of the mansion. She is right there in the stretch room, and that is Constance, our attic bride. If you know the story of the Haunted Mansion, you know that she is a Black Widow bride, killing her husbands and gaining wealth for each one. And she clearly makes it out as an old lady because she is sitting on the gravestone of one of her husband victims. You can tell this because his name George, which we are going to see later, is one of the husband's names. He's got a hatchet in his head, which is her weapon of choice. And she's got that blood red rose, which you can see outside the mansion. And she has a variety of pearls, which we're going to talk more about later. As you finally enter the mansion, make sure to say hello to Master Gracie, who you can see aging in the portrait in front of you. And then you're headed into the stretch room. And it is here that we sense a disquieting metamorphosis, because this haunted room, is it actually stretching or not? Well, there's a couple things to make that effect feel even more impactful than it is. For example, the wallpaper they chose. It had to be time period appropriate, so it's striped, but also because it's vertical stripes, it helps enhance that feeling of that fact that the room is actually stretching. And yes, here at Walt Disney World, that room is actually stretching. There was a debate whether or not they were going to have the stretch room here in Walt Disney World because they did not need it the way they needed it in Disneyland. In Disneyland, this is being built after the park was already open, and there's something running around the entire park that cannot be moved: the train tracks. They did not have enough room for this entire attraction to sit within the train track parameter in New Orleans Square. So they had to be able to get you under the train tracks and into a large show building backstage, which is where the majority of the attraction takes place. I'm sorry to ruin the illusion for you, but most of the ride does not take place in the Haunted Mansion facade. In Disneyland, you're pretty much just doing the stretch room inside of the New Orleans Manor, and then you're going in an actual elevator when you're in the stretch room, down, underground, and then boarding your doom buggies, which is why also the first thing you do in Disneyland is go uphill, because you're coming back up to ground level. But this attraction in Magic Kingdom is an opening day attraction. They have planned for it within the big blueprints of the park, the master plan of the park. The train tracks are far away from the Haunted Mansion. So do they even need the stretch room? Of course you need the stretch room. It's how the whole thing starts. It is, again, one of the most iconic and amazing parts of this attraction. So the Imagineers had to figure out a way, because we are in Florida. You cannot tunnel in Florida. It would flood. So they had to figure out a way instead to make the haunted room actually stretch. So when you're in the Florida Haunted Mansion, the ceiling really is rising above you. It is actually stretching. And you can tell that if you pay close attention to where the candelabras are. The gargoyles holding the candles, look at where they are when you start the stretch room and when you end the stretch room. And speaking of the gargoyles, one of my favorite details of the Haunted Mansion happened with the 2007 upgrade. They were able to come in and upgrade the entire speaker system so that it really feels like the ghost host is swirling around you with how they're playing the audio. And if you linger a little bit, not too long, don't disrupt the flow, but if you linger a little bit as you are leaving the stretch room, you will actually hear the gargoyles whisper, and one of them will tell you to get out. If you would like to hear that, know that the door opens under the ballerina portrait, so go as far away from her as possible, and that means you'll be the last people leaving the stretch room. After the stretch room, you're going to head into the load area, and that theme of feeling like something's always watching you continues. Look at the wallpaper, look at the candle holders, look at the light fixtures. It just gives you an eerie sense that there are, in fact, 999 happy haunts here keeping an eye on you. As you are ready to board your doom buggy, one thing a lot of people miss is if you look up, there are different portraits. These were an original effect in the mansion, and they were lit with a simple lighting trick in their eyes to feel like they were always following you. Within ride refurbishments, they have replaced these with a more advanced trick where the lightning effect happens and you see things like Medusa. However, they moved these to the load area, and these are nods to real and fictional horrors. The Victorian killer is a nod to Jack the Ripper. You have a nod to Dracula, Rasputin, and the Mariner, who was going to have a larger role in the mansion, but they ended up cutting it because the story was getting too convoluted. But he does have a large role on the Haunted Mansion parlor at sea, which makes sense. The first scene you come into on the mansion includes the library, and these moving busts were, again, a very simple trick developed by Yale Gracie and his team. They are sculpted inversely into the wall, they're concave, and then they're lit with a pinpoint light from the neck up, so you're moving, they're not, but because of the way the lighting tricks your eyes, it makes it seem like they're always following you. Additionally, those are not real books on the wall. They have been painted on. When you have Disney animators at your disposal, you can paint some pretty clever tricks. But my favorite is that there's a set of books called The Art of Deception and The Deception of Art, and the author of those is Claude Coates, who was one of our lead Imagineers. Also in the library is the iconic Haunted Mansion chair, which a lot of people call the Donald Duck chair, because the pattern on the chair kind of looks like Donald's hat, eyes, and bill. As you round the corner after seeing all the creepy eyes watching you, you see the endless hallway with the ghost carrying the candelabra, one of my favorite effects, but also you have this night that seems to be moving. Originally in Disneyland, they put a real person in there, but legend has it a guest got so scared that they punched the knight in the face and hit this cast member, so then they just had to switch it to an animatronic. I love when the Imagineers get a little nod or hide themselves in the attraction, and no one did it better than Exitencio, who is the voice you hear of the guy trying to get out of the coffin. Let me out, let me out! He recorded that. We're then going to get to the spooky hallway where you've got the bending doors and the knocking, and this was a direct inspiration from Claude Coates from a horror movie called The Haunting, which was very popular at the time. You're also going to see, again, the iconic wallpaper, as well as some small framed portraits on the walls. These are original concept art drawings by Harper Goff and Rolly Crump, including the Hatbox Ghost, who we're going to get to in a second. You can also, if you've ever wanted to know what the ghost host looks like, not Paul Frees, but the actual character of the ghost host, since he's hanging around the mansion, you can see a portrait of him on the right-hand side as you're headed backwards. He's the one with the noose in his neck and an axe, which tells me how he got down from the stretch room. Another iconic scene that has been teched up in a nice way over the years is the staircases to nowhere. The original is a pretty simple effect of just using mirrors around the room to make it feel like the stairs go on forever, but with that updated tech, they've made it look like there are footprints and the ghosts blowing out the candles when they get to the bottom. That's a detail I feel like a lot of people miss. But this scene was inspired by the real-life Winchester Mansion in San Jose, California. Lady Winchester was a little bit unwell and believed there were ghosts and spirits in her home, and she was convinced that the sound of construction would keep them away. So after her husband passed away, she hired construction crews to just build whatever they wanted so that she couldn't hear the ghosts and she would just hear the banging and clanging of the construction all the time. So they eventually ran out of actual projects to do and would just start building staircases to nowhere. It is now a very popular tourist attraction. I'd like to see it myself, but it is known as a haunted location. We've made it to one of the most popular characters of all, Madame Leota and her seance. Now, as I mentioned, she is modeled after Imagineer Leota Toombs, but her voice may sound a little more familiar if you enjoy classic Disney movies. Leota Toombs' real voice was very high-pitched, and she talked a little bit more like this, and that's not very scary or intimidating in what the Imagineers envisioned. So they hired voice actress Eleanor Audley to come voice Madame Leota, and Eleanor Audley also voiced Maleficent and Lady Tremaine. And now that you know this, you'll never be able to unhear it.
Call in the spirits, wherever they're at.
Originally, and a lot of you may remember this, Leota was stationary. Her head did not fly about the room, and that's because of how the tech was built. They made this casting of Leota Toombs' face, and then they had to record her speaking, saying the different lines, or mouthing the different lines. Her head had to be perfectly still, so the Imagineers rigged up a brace, and then she wore an all-black outfit, and was standing in front of a black background with the ghost makeup on. She then had to keep her head, again, perfectly still, so all of the acting comes from the movement of her mouth, nose, and eyes, and she recorded the Madame Leota lines. They then used a projector to project the video of Leota Toombs onto the casting of her face, thus being the original use of the first and original projection mapping technology. Since then, they were able to develop a small projector that could project from the inside out and put the recording inside Leota's face, which is why she's able to fly around the room. However, if you've ever thought, man, I could steal that and put that in my home, one, that's a terrible idea, and two, if anyone gets out during that scene, her head will fly up towards the ceiling because she is one of the most precious items in Magic Kingdom. Please do not do this. Now that Madame Leota's seance is complete, in the original story, the ghosts can appear in front of us in their ghostly wake. In, again, one of the most famous scenes of the attraction, the ballroom scene. This has dazzled guests for over 60 years. In fact, when the Imagineers first built the attraction, they brought in magicians and asked them if they could figure out how they were doing it, and they could not. People have been trying to figure it out for years and years since. A lot of people attributing it to things like holograms, but this attraction was built in the 60s. Those didn't exist. It's actually a very simple trick called Pepper's Ghost. And it's a little trick that had been around for over 100 years before the Haunted Mansion was built. It was named for a scientist named John Henry Pepper, who popularized it in 1862 while doing a Christmas Eve production of the Charles Dickens novella, The Haunted Man and Ghost Bargain. And this trick was so impressive to the audience, they thought there was a real ghost. So they knew they had a hit on their hands. But it works very, very simply. Have you ever been in a lit room when it's dark outside and you look outside and you can see like a ghostly version of yourself? That's Pepper's Ghost. It's literally just light and glass, and that's it. So when you are on your doom buggy, looking down on the ballroom scene, the ghosts that you see are actual animatronics that are above you and below you. Above you, you've got the dueling ghost, the ghost hanging from the chandelier. Below you, you've got the ghosts at the birthday party, the ballroom dancers, etc. Because the room is dark, all they have to do is shine a light on the animatronics above and below you, and their reflection will appear through the glass that's in front of you and in the ballroom. That's right, there are huge panels of glass, floor to ceiling, which is how the effect works, and why the magicians that saw this in the 60s didn't believe it was real, because they didn't think they could get pieces of glass that big. The pieces of glass are so big that they had to be airlifted in one by one through the ceiling and dropped down incredibly carefully, and then they put those columns in between the different panels of glass. And to my knowledge, it's only had to be replaced once, and that was out at Disneyland because a young guest, before there were different security measures, wanted to duel with his favorite ghost, so he brought in his BB gun, tried to shoot it at the ghost. It, of course, cracked the glass in front of him. So there was a time where if you went to Disneyland's Haunted Mansion, there were big spiders on the glass there, and that was to cover up the different cracks. They have since fixed that. But to my knowledge, it's never broken here in Walt Disney World, and I'm sure the Imagineers are thrilled by that, because can you imagine what a pain it would be to take the roof off the ballroom and then lower in huge panels of glass again. Couple of notable ghosts to keep your eye out for when you're looking at the ballroom scene. Disney loves to reuse faces. Blaine Gibson, the master sculptor, would sculpt one face, and it's a lot easier to make duplicates of it than sculpt a brand new one, which is why you're going to see the same faces appear on a lot of different classic attractions. For example, the grandmother rocking right here in the ballroom scene, she's also the grandmother over on Carousel of Progress. The ghost blowing out the candles because it's their birthday, well, they're making the same facial expression that you might need to whistle at perhaps a dog who has the keys because you're trapped. You may also notice the ballroom dancers. A fun thing I like to notice is that the women are leading the men because you're actually seeing the reflection of the animatronics. Additionally, the dresses that they are wearing were cut from the same patterns as some of the earliest princess and performer gowns in Disneyland, but of course aged and made looking spooky to match the theme of the mansion. Now's the time when I tell you a little story about myself that relates to the Imagineers, and that's I was a guide on a tour called Walt Disney Marceline to Magic Kingdom, which actually does take you to the ballroom scene, and you get to go under the Haunted Mansion and see what those animatronics look like and how the Pepper's Ghost effect works. It's very, very cool, but I used to give that tour, and so we were under the Haunted Mansion one time, and we had these little whisper unit things on, which is what you wear on the tour where one person can talk and everybody else is mic'd. My friends ran away. They abandoned me, and I was left alone in the dark underneath the Haunted Mansion with just the clicking noises of the animatronics, and it was a nightmare. But I guess the creators of the Haunted Mansion will be thrilled to know that their attraction is still scaring people. No more so than Yale Gracie and Rolly Crump, who were working on some things at the Imagineering offices, and they had some of the animatronics from the Haunted Mansion, and they kept being told by the custodial team who would clean at night to please turn the animatronics off because it was so scary. So they decided to do the opposite. They set up a motion sensor so that before the custodial team walked directly into their office, the lights were on and the animatronics were off. But once they hit that motion sensor, it flipped and the lights turned off and the animatronics turned on, magnified by some ghostly lights. And they came in the next morning to find an abandoned broom and a voicemail saying that they can clean their own office from now on. And speaking of Rolly Crump, he gets a nod in the next scene. After he passed away a few years ago, they added a small figure of the Candleman, which was a man made of melted wax, and one of his original ideas for the Museum of the Weird. They added a small figure of that directly from his concept art into the mansion as a nod to him. Now, the attic scene is what tells us the most about our attic bride. That's why you hear a thumping heart as you go through, and you start learning the story of Constance. You'll see her different wedding setups, not once, not twice, but 5 different times, where you see the banners, you see the gifts. But you notice as you go by each of the portraits that the husband's head disappears and Constance gets a new strand of pearls. Pay close attention and you'll also notice that any bride and groom figurines, the groom's head has fallen off. Or things like bride and groom champagne coupes, the groom's is knocked over. Doesn't take a ghost hunter to understand what Constance is doing, but just in case you're unclear, when you finally see her appear, she has on all 5 strands of pearls and is holding a hatchet. Again, as we hinted in the stretch room earlier, her weapon of choice. You might also notice a hat rack with a variety of hat boxes, which some people interpret as that's where she's carrying their heads, and some interpret it as the fact that the Hatbox Ghost may be one of her victims or her spooky accomplice. And speaking of the Hatbox Ghost, this is where we're going to talk about him, because this is where he belongs as seen in the Disneyland version. The Hatbox Ghost was one of the coolest original ghosts by Yale Gracie, and they were going to do Pepper's ghost effect to make his head appear and disappear. However, where they ended up placing him in the attic based on the other effects, more light could get in than they expected, and you would end up seeing both heads at the same time. So the Hatbox Ghost originally only lasted about a week because Yale Gracie was a perfectionist and he didn't like that the effect wasn't working perfectly. However, the Hatbox Ghost continued to create lore around him. He was in a lot of the promotional materials for the attraction and for Disneyland. People heard legend of this ghost that no longer existed there. But it wasn't until 2015 that an Imagineer named Daniel Joseph, who admired Yale Gracie and became an Imagineer because of Yale Gracie, tinkered in his own garage and figured out how to do the Hatbox Ghost effect perfectly. And they debuted it in Disneyland in 2015. They added him here a few years ago, but in my opinion, he's in the wrong place because you can see him prior to Madame Leota's seance. The Imagineer said it's because he's the Hatbox Ghost and he does what he wants. But what do you think? At this point, we are headed out of the attic and into the graveyard. And one interpretation of the story is that the bride has seen you and she knows that you know her secret and she can't have that. So she throws you out the window, which is why the gravedigger and his dog look so scared as you pass by. They're used to the other 999 happy haunts, but you're new. But it's all good because you get to join the swinging wake because these happy haunts have truly materialized. And another of the most famous is the bus of the ghost singing. The ghost with the mustache singing, not Walt Disney, which is a common misconception. And guest services actually gets a lot of people writing in furious that they are dishonoring Walt Disney with a broken, knocked over statue. But it's not Walt, it's Thurl Ravenscroft, who was another voice actor, lead singer of the Mellow Men, which is the group singing Grim Grinning Ghosts for us right there. Thurl Ravenscroft, besides doing this very famously, Tony the Tiger also sang You're a Mean One, Mr. Grinch in the original animated cartoon. The ghosts here are also animatronics, having a good time. Personal favorite of mine is the mummy, enjoying a little tea party. But they are behind a material called scrim, which is a netting type material to make them kind of look hazy and more ghost-like, even though they're in their corporeal form in front of you. The Imagineers experimented with all sorts of colors to bring the ghosts to life, all sorts of different paint and lighting effects, and ultimately they chose the color gold because it looked the best with the scrim and lighting effects. Here's where we get another gag from Mark Davis as well, because one of the last ghosts you see is an opera singer ghost just belting out the tunes like me in my car performing Hamilton. And that is a nod to the common phrase, quote, "It's not over until the fat lady sings." This is a long-used colloquialism. I did not make this up, but this is what this is based on. And it comes from opera, specifically the final aria sung in, I'm not going to be able to say this, Richard Wagner's Götterdämmerung. Hold on. Götterdämmerung. That sounded French. That sounds French. I don't know that I can say that, but I'm gonna try. Götterdämmerung. Oh wait, it spelled it out for me. Götterdämmerung. Götterdämmerung. Richard Wagner's Götterdämmerung, which is the last of his Ring Cycle operas. It is sung by, traditionally, a heavy-set soprano, which is where this ghost comes from. But you know we can't leave until a ghost is going to follow you home, so one of the three hitchhiking ghosts, Ezra, Phineas, and Gus, appears with you in your doom buggy. Originally, this was just another simple use of Pepper's ghost, but they have added that tech, so now the ghosts do something a little bit silly, and they can tell how many people are in your doom buggy, 1, 2, or 3, and their actions will vary based on that. And before one of them joins you in your doom buggy, you get to see them right there. And this is really hard to see, but there's actually a portrait of Lady Maud from the Game in the Queue with lighting a fire to the back left-hand side of the ghost, which completes that story. Additionally, if you look at Phineas, he's the one with the kind of hunched over, the medium-sized ghost. He's got bumper stickers for different locations, such as Hong Kong and Anaheim on his case. Now, it is said that these ghosts can predict your day. If you get Gus, who's the shortest bearded ghost, you're gonna have a great day. If you get Phineas, who's the middle-sized one, hunched over with the traveler's case, well, medium day. You're gonna have a fine day. But if you get Ezra, the spookiest, scariest looking one, who's tall and skeletal, well, you're gonna have a bad day. So, good luck. And the very, very last thing you see before you disembark your doom buggy is little Leota.
Be sure to bring your death certificate.
That is, once again, using the face of Leota Toombs, but this time we're also getting to hear her real voice. Now, as you exit the mansion, don't forget to look up and enjoy all of those cobwebs right there. They're throughout the ride, but you can really see them good as you exit, and it is my joy and privilege and honor to once again tell you how those are made. And you helped. Basically, they have a big, I like to imagine like a Ghostbusters backpack, and it sprays this hot glue like stringy substance around the mansion, and then natural things cling to it, like dust, or skin cells, or hair. And then if it gets too heavy, it will fall too much, they'll take that one down and they'll redo it, which is why sometimes you come in and it's really dusty, grossy, cobwebby. Sometimes they may be, looking for a fresh batch, which means, once again, you have helped make the mansion and Tower of Terror, anytime you see cobwebs like that, spooky scary. Hey, thanks, and you're welcome. But also, if you've ever considered adding more than just your skin cells to the Haunted Mansion, maybe a loved one of yours is a huge fan and wants to be number 1,000, and you think, I'm gonna dump their ashes in the Haunted Mansion. Don't do that. I feel like that should be an obvious thing to say, but it has happened many times, in fact, because people think, what a great place to lay someone to rest. No. Gross. Sorry, no offense. But that's all kinds of health hazards. You cannot leave a human ashes in the Haunted Mansion or anywhere on Disney property for a few reasons. One, well, that will ruin everybody else's day because one, yes, they can see you the entire time that you're on the mansion, and they will notice you doing this, and they will stop the ride. And then everyone else is mad at you. And this isn't just stopped for like a second because they've got to reset it because they were loading, a wheelchair guest. No, this is like stopped for the day because now it's a health hazard. And they have to bring in this machine, which is basically like a giant vacuum specifically for this purpose to suck up the ashes. So you think you're laying your family member to rest somewhere they love, they're really getting sucked up in a vacuum. And is that what you want? Is that what they'd want? No. So let's all just not dump ashes in the Haunted Mansion, shall we? Speaking of, we've got Asher T. Ashes and I Am Ready, Loves You Trudy, Trudy Do. All of these puns on these two crypts were written by Exitencio, which is not surprising considering he also wrote, again, Grim Grinning Ghosts, as well as the narration from the Ghost Host. He's a pretty clever guy, so he, of course, is the guy who came up with I Am a Spook. This crypt, however, is unique to Florida because it celebrates, or I guess not celebrates, the pirate Blackbeard, who was known for murdering his wives. 7 winsome wives, some fat, some thin. 6 of them were faithful, but the 7th did him in. This is based on that real lore, and while he is historically a French pirate, people believe they brought this to Florida because of Florida's history with pirates. Also, one thing that a lot of people don't know is here, and we'll probably never see, is the chicken exit that lets you avoid the stretch room. Why would you want to do that? Maybe you've got somebody that can't handle the stretch room. Maybe it's a little too intense for some little ones. And people don't realize that you can just ask the cast members and they can actually guide you around through the servants' quarters and you can avoid doing the stretch room. But what's cool in there is that there are a couple more Easter eggs. Again, this is the servants' quarters, so they have all of the keys to the different rooms in the Haunted Mansion, including the seance room, including the attic, including the library, and a couple of those keys are missing, so who knows what the servants are up to. There's also a placard with a bunch of bells hanging on it, and if you've seen a show like Downton Abbey, you know that that's from the servants' quarters. They would see which bell was ringing, and that's which person is summoning them to which room. But each of those bells not only has a location in the house, but also an Imagineering nod. So it might be Master Gracie's bedroom, it may be Madame Leota's, and the only one we haven't talked about yet is for Sam McKim. He was an actor as well as a storyboard artist for some Disney movies, and then he ended up being a very well-known Disney artist doing lots of concept art, including some here at the Haunted Mansion, but he's probably best well-known for drawing the original Disneyland maps. So that's a very cool Easter egg and space, but most people will never step foot in there, even though they've been on the Haunted Mansion. Big shout out and cast compliment to Mansion Maid Kim, who not only guided me in there, because you need to be guided to go into the servants' quarters, but she is also a Disney nerd and a mansion tour guide, so she was telling me all kinds of fun facts as well. And as you leave, don't forget to say hello to the pets in the pet cemetery as well, like beloved Waddle. Little Waddle saw the truck, but little Waddle didn't duck. And if you look all the way back, you're going to see one J. Thaddeus Toad, which was added by the Imagineers after Mr. Toad's Wild Ride closed in Fantasyland and was replaced by The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh. Now, we cannot see what's on his gravestone. However, legend has it reads, "Here lies Toad, sad but true, not as marketable as Winnie the Pooh." Also, just because we're done with the ride doesn't mean we're done with the video, because we're gonna go into Memento Mori, which is the gift shop right here, because there's some cool Easter eggs and details in there. But I just read the mansion, obviously, and I don't know, like, if I really believe in ghosts or not, but I will tell you that I got stopped because they were clearly loading a wheelchair party right in one of the hardest to photograph rooms, which is the ghost host on the wall, as well as those original concept art renderings from Rolly. And I don't know, maybe I've been talking about Mansion for too long, but I kind of want to believe that those were the ghosts of Rolly and Mark and Claude and Yale, stopping me at a place that I was able to get some really cool photos to show this detail and to show their work that I never would have been able to get had the ride been moving the whole time. So, I don't know, something to think about. Anyway, like I was saying, we're headed into Memento Mori, which is the gift shop here at Haunted Mansion. And Memento Mori is a fun and whimsical sounding name, but it's also an old Latin phrase that basically translates to remember that you have to die, which is kind of oddly comforting in the sense of it happens to everybody. And so it's a kind of live your life, because ultimately that's the end anyway. Voldemort talks about it a lot in 28 Years Later. And when I was watching that movie, I was like, oh my God, he's a Haunted Mansion fan. But no, he was explaining the actual Latin meaning behind it. But here inside Memento Mori, you can find, as if you needed more evidence that this is probably the most beloved ride on the planet, everything you can imagine Haunted Mansion apparel, toys, books, tech, anything. Haunted Mansion, it is waiting here for you. And whilst I have clearly purchased some of these things, that's not why we're here right now. For starters, there's this lovely painting on the wall, and if you look close enough, you may realize that this is Leota in her prime. She's got her crystal ball right here, as well as her tarot cards. And if you watch it long enough, do you see what's happening? The lighting in the store is changing, and we see the raven and the wallpaper illuminating behind her. Also, she's hard to see and even harder to videotape, but Madame Leota also appears in this mirror very subtly if you stand and watch, and you know it's her because, again, we've got the raven, we've got the roses that are left on her grave, and then her face appears, and she murmurs something very quietly. If you look around the room up on the shelves here, you're going to notice a lot of bottles, and a couple of them look like they may contain spirits, which is a pun because alcohol, but also if you watch for long enough, you may see an apparition or a spirit make an appearance and quickly disappear. Notice this very weird and unique candle holder right here. If that kind of reminded you of Candleman, the creepy wax figure we saw in the attic by Rolly Crump, it should, because this was another one of his melted wax figurine characters. I most distinctly saw it in the Behind the Attraction episode on Disney Plus about this ride. Some of his drawings show up. It's hard to find at other places, but that's also a Rolly Crump nod right there. And lastly, in here, looking at some of these book titles, you can tie them to the mansion. This is the David Copperfield history right there. Of course, the famous Magician, which is basically all of the Haunted Mansion is. It's a big magic trick. And then lastly, right here next to this very cool Madame Leota replica that you could take home if you'd like. You've got this book by Charles Dickens, which I'm choosing to believe is a nod to the origins of Pepper's ghost. Oh my gosh, I didn't know they made this replica of my favorite ghost from the graveyard, the mummy having a tea party. That's excellent. Well, friends, that is a wrap on my Secrets of the Haunted Mansion video. And I don't know about you guys, but I think the Imagineers absolutely killed this one. Every time I drag my body onto this classic and beloved ride, I have an amazing time. The effects have held up for decades and decades. It is a true testament to the Imagineering genius of these original Imagineers, using simple things like lighting, like paint, like glass, like mirrors, to come up with some of the most iconic theme park effects we've ever seen. It's truly stood the test of time, even with updates like the interactive queue and the Hatbox Ghost. The Haunted Mansion largely remains unchanged from its original iteration, again debuting in Disneyland in 1969. It is, in my opinion, the most beloved. It's certainly got the biggest cult following of any attraction worldwide. And a lot of the effects that were pioneered by the Imagineers here are not only holding up in this classic attraction, but they are still being used and improved upon in new rides that we see in theme parks across the world today. And because this is such a beloved attraction, I know it's a lot of your favorites, so hopefully you had fun following along. Hopefully you learned a new fun fact or learned a new detail to look for the next time you're here at Magic Kingdom, or maybe you learned a little bit about the people that made this attraction come to life. I absolutely love doing these secret series, and this is our first one as Mammoth Club doing a deep dive on a particular attraction. So if you enjoyed it as well, make sure to materialize a comment down below and let me know what ride we should do next. We could keep it classic and do like Pirates of the Caribbean and Jungle Cruise. We could go with a little bit more new age and hit Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. We could go over to Universal. We can pick anything in the world and regions beyond. But in the meantime, friends, make sure to rate, review, subscribe, follow us on social media, chat with the Man Fam in Discord, check out our Patreon for behind the scenes content and more. Make sure you hurry back to the next video. And until next time, friends, I'm Molly, and it's been a chillingly good time.